Welcome everybody to Two Guys in a Stack of Comics. I am Reed alongside Mike. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I got my stack of comics right there.
Got the stack as always.
Yes.
Wanted to talk a little bit of today. Me and Mike always kind of have conversations about like the overall comic book industry and kind of what we see. Obviously, we're guys who are in the shop. We're the Wednesday warriors, so to speak. We're there picking up our pull lists and all of that.
Well,
But
I go on Thursdays usually.
you don't pick yours up the day after. But we're both,
Thursday while you're here.
yeah, pretty much.
This week I didn't get till Friday though. So
Sometimes that job stuff gets in the way, especially since
yeah.
we will both never be digital comics guys. I know there's folks who download their comics digitally. I got to have the actual book in my hands, the actual physical.
Yep.
It's there. What we wanted to talk a little bit about today, I think twofold kind of topics we want to get to. One is just how do we feel about modern comics and what they're doing, and then two, how do we feel about kind of comic coverage and how comics are covered online? So I think we can start kind of more with the coverage part of it. One of the things me and Mike did when we started this YouTube channel, and we're a small channel, just two guys in a stack of comics talking. But one of the things is we noticed both of us that there was so much negativity in the comic book space. You can go online and find 1,000 videos just trashing everything, right?
Yeah, they're some really huge channels too.
Mm-hmm.
I used to follow a bunch, but lately I've been having fun delving, and my YouTube feed knows that I like small comic book channels now.
Mm-hmm.
So, like a few, I go out of my way to look for, but a lot of the and I'll mention a couple of my favorites, and I'm sure Reed, they're probably your favorites too. One of them isn't, he hasn't posted anything in like a month, and I'm sorry, that he's not because I loved his content. But um, but there were, I don't know if I want to call out specific channels, but if you're it's safe to say, if you're watching this, you watch a lot of comic book content, uh,
Probably.
like Reed and I do. And, you know, I just turn it off. It goes dark, it goes negative. Usually it starts out with the films, and yeah, there's a lot of bad films out there. But Reed and I, when we started this channel, we always wanted to make sure we talk about the good stuff, and what we like about it. And I just feel bad that the algorithms for all the social medias are designed around the negativity, and it's a spiraling, uh, you know, self fulfilling self. What do you call it, Reed?
Self-fulfilling kind of prophecy. The more negative you
Yeah,
are,
and it feeds, and it's a spiral, and it's just like, and if you're making money on YouTube,
well, of course you're going to feed you're going to feed.
you get trapped. Like, I guess these guys don't have regular jobs, they just do this, and if that's what's going to pay the rent, I guess you got to go there and do it. It's sad, that
I think there's some important
the positive
distinctions with it.
channels don't get the love.
I think there are some important distinctions with things in that I can absolutely say there are a lot of trash comic books that come out each month. There are a lot of bad writers. There are a lot of bad artists. I will never mind people who genuinely call that stuff out. I think it should. I think there's folks who have been hired at times to write characters where it almost seems like they have a personal vendetta against that character. I think
I know,
Steve
right?
Rogers as a
Why?
yeah, I feel like Steve Rogers as a character especially has been a target for that. With his last 4 or 5 writers really who just seem like man,
That's unfortunate. I mean, come on, Captain America, man.
Superman I think has fallen victim to that a little bit. I think some of it's rebounding a bit, but I think the other part where comic books has got some major flaws. I think you see a lot of people retconning things and kind of in a way besmirching or looking down on the work of the giants who kind of built the industry the way they are. and kind of doing this whole I know better sort of way. And that I think those should absolutely be called out. I will never have a problem with anybody doing that. I think that's important to do so. I think, especially if you see great characters being tarnished, I think
And
providing feedback for that's good.
and you know what?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think like, in the 80s and 90s when there was only two games in town
Hmm.
and you were a comic book writer and you had some really great ideas, but you were forced to write in this construct, but you felt like you had been given license to unleash your creativity, but you had to live in this world. I think some writers and some artists kind of, tried to draw out of and create out of bounds there.
Hmm.
But with the advent of indie comics and, uh, you know, when you go to the local comic book shop, on the wall at Dragon's Lair, there are two full walls of indies.
Yeah.
And like, if you want to write something way different, don't make Steve Rogers fulfill that literary dream.
Yeah.
you know, create something new out of whole cloth. There's so much great indie out there, and it's wide open. Like, go do that. See what happens. Play around. The playground is open. Let's just say to where it wasn't, 30, 40 years ago. There was only two games in town, really.
Yeah. No, and I feel like that's one of the reasons, I never fully delve into the negative stuff, but I do feel like, yeah, there's a lot of, and I think as a person who's mainly Marvel and DC still, the X-Men were really characters I foundationally read as a kid. What they've done to the X-Men in recent years, it kind of feels like they hire these folks who want to write like an indie book that's very obscure or about, their own personal life experience. And instead of them writing an indie book, they want to wrap that onto a character. And so basically they will transform Iceman or Psylocke or Cyclops or Storm or whoever it may be to kind of reflect their own personal journey. And I think that's fine for people to do artistic expression like that. That's great if you want to tell that story, but there's indie books for that. When you take a character who's been around 60 years and you just decide, hey, well, because I have this sort of perspective on life, I'm going to morph that onto this character where that's never been a part of who they are.
Yeah.
You are changing things largely out of your own personal animus towards things.
Yeah.
I think it does really hurt the overall characters. And one of the things that's interesting for me is like I'm more of a religious person in my own life. I will never go to comic books for that though. Right? Like I don't need Batman to be religious. I don't ever go to a Spider-Man book expecting him to be religious. I think that's if someone would take that who had my same religious beliefs and wrap it onto Batman, I'd be just as upset about that as if they would do, something ridiculous to an X-Men character because that's not who the character is. These
Right.
characters have defined personalities. They have who we know them to be. And there's a difference between like a subtle change that takes place over time and is built into the story, as opposed to, hey, in 3 issues, I'm just going to fundamentally transform this character because I feel like
Yeah, I mean, the comic book medium has always been loose and fast to begin with, but it can be as equally destructive
it. Hmm.
in a fast way because of the way it's set up. It's a very interesting medium. It's, probably the perfect medium for humankind. I mean, we've been telling stories and drawing pictures about those stories since, 50,000 years ago in the caves of France, or,
Hmm.
80,000 years ago. And they've recently found some caves in Africa that have the same kind of, painting. And, there were stories that may not have been able to put the word, but if they had thought of it and they had written language, they would have put, this was me hunting the deer today, and so it's just so fundamental for humankind. It's the perfect way to tell a story.
Hmm.
But the comic book medium's always loose and fast. Everything can change quickly, but that's why you got to be careful. And what bugs me the most is like these characters are tried and true for a reason.
Yeah.
They're going to be successful if you stay in the bounds. You can't go wrong, and we've seen it time again with movies and TV shows. But it happens also in the comic book medium itself. Somebody new gets assigned to the project, and they don't feel like writing for Spider-Man anymore.
Yep.
And so they write him a weird way. Um, the cool thing about comics, though, is you can always rebound because of the flexibility of the medium. You can always come back to home base, but it's unfortunate for fans to endure, some of those
Well,
segues.
it's one thing when it's your favorite characters getting kind of botched like that. And so, when you're a fan of something, obviously, fan is short for fanatic, you're going to be passionate about it.
Yeah.
I think what does bug me with some of the negativity I see, I think there's a little bit of laziness to it too. In that, one of the things I've had to discover in the last couple of years, and I'll still always buy Batman, Wolverine, Daredevil, Spider-Man out of loyalty, but I've had to endure some pretty bad runs in the last couple of years. But the thing is, just because those main 3 or 4 are bad is not a indication of the entire comic book industry. You can always find, for me in the last 5 or 6 years, Cable is a character I never read in the 90s. Had someone recommend Cable to me at my local comic shop, ended up going down the rabbit hole, tracing down all kinds of Cable comics from the 90s. Moon Knight is a character I'd never really read. Had someone kind of TV show spark my interest in that, read back, and he's got a great comic now. I think you mentioned the indies. There's so many good indie books that come out.
Conan's on indie now.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of bad Conan, but they're doing Conan good now.
Oh, they're doing fantastic work on it. James
I
Bond.
might not be buying X-Men, but I'll buy Conan.
Yeah, and that's the thing is
I may not be buying Spider-Man
now,
but I get Blade Runner.
Yeah. No, and I think that's the thing that I get tired of with some of the negativity is, look, there's absolutely issues, 100%, the things that are going wrong, but you can delve deeper and you can still find a ton of good books out there.
And right? Flash is good right now.
Flash has had a pretty good reboot going right now.
Yeah.
Who knows if it'll stay that way? But I think the other part with the negativity piece that drives me a little crazy, it is kind of, to me, like when you go to a movie and you want to dislike it, you can always find a way to dislike things. And I feel like a lot of coverage now is designed that way of, I'm going to pick this up. I don't want to enjoy it. I want to rip it to pieces. And so every single panel, I'm going to look at whatever flaw I can find, any word that's wrong, anything, and I'm going to pick that to heck. To just
and by the way, on YouTube, I'm going to get a ton of views.
Yeah. And, what's funny is I saw myself go into that a few years ago with Star Wars, in that I have always been a massive Star Wars fan. I massively disliked the movie The Last Jedi. I will go on record and saying I think that's the worst movie I've ever watched in theaters. However,
that bad.
There are still, beat Batman versus Superman, which is
Wait, what about the Flash movie back here?
That's knocking on the door of the top 5. I'll give it credit because of how good Keaton was.
Breaks my heart, but
I noticed myself going down the Star Wars rabbit hole of just all of a sudden, because it had lost the benefit of the doubt with me, I was increasingly negative on everything Star Wars. And then I got to a point where I'm like, man, some of this is actually pretty good, and I'm just wanting to dislike it. And I actually, and it's funny, when you mentally get into that mindset, you can make yourself dislike things. I kind of feel like DC had that movies-wise for a while, where you had so many MCU fans, and they would go to every DC movie, and it was like, we're just going to nitpick the death out of this movie. And it almost felt like the reviews for DC, there was like almost like a personal animosity of like, how dare you try to be Marvel?
There was.
And granted, DC made a lot of bad movies. And I think that's
some
an example of it. I think the other stuff, when we look at modern comic books and kind of things that I think, if you said, because sales have not been good, I think we can both, as people who care about the comic book industry, sales haven't been good. And it's not that people aren't reading comics, because manga is exploding. I mean, it's everywhere. I think me and you go to a lot of the same comic book shops, but I'm stunned every time I walk in how much the manga section is growing,
It keeps
how
growing.
much the comic section is shrinking.
The
I remember as a kid going to Barnes and Noble.
indie section is getting bigger.
Yep. Well, no, yeah. I mean, I think it's 60%
Used to
of the
just be like
store.
one section of indie. Now there's more indie than Marvel and DC together.
Well, what's funny is like 60% of stores now manga, 40% is comics, and about 30% of the comics are indies. And there's about 8% Marvel and 2% DC in a store.
It's going the wrong way.
It's crazy to see that. And I think we can say that the comic book industry is in some trouble. I think if I had to fix it, and I'll kind of go with you as well, if you had some things you would fix, I think one thing that I would get rid of out of comic books that I think has absolutely damaged the comic book industry is multiverses. I think multiverses are a really cool idea that has become a really lazy.
But sparingly. Use it sparingly.
Well, and there's a difference between Flash of Two Worlds with Jay Garrick and Barry Allen.
The original.
There's a difference between Batman and Batman Beyond and kind of here's a future possible story and what we have now. Because what we have now is we basically have anything can happen at any time, and we'll just retcon it and say it's in the multiverse. And it basically has removed stakes from comic books because you can just kill a character now, just pull a multiverse copy of them out. It's ruined, I think, the overall impact that stories had. And that one of the coolest things to me growing up when I was collecting back issues and stuff, when Gwen Stacy dies in the Spider-Man comic, that's a piece of history. That's real. That happened. That stays. That's had an effect. That's that.
Unless you lived in Mexico.
Well, she continued on. Some of those international storylines didn't adapt that.
Right.
It's kind of killed me in recent years in that we've seen a lot of sacred cows, characters that I thought were dead and dead for good, that now kind of just get resurrected in this lazy multiverse, time travel. You know, as much as I think the Red Hood is a cool concept, it feels cheap to me that Jason Todd's alive again. As much as the Winter Soldier's kind of a cool concept, it kind of feels cheap to me that Bucky's alive again.
Yeah.
You know, I guess Spider-Gwen, another version of Gwen Stacy that's alive again, multiverse kind of thing. I understand the concept being cool initially, but I think it's become the number one problem. And I think it's stretching to the movies too. And that I think there's interest in it, but at a small level, not at an overall over-income. It's kind of like garlic. A little bit of garlic in your food is fantastic.
Yeah.
If you load garlic on everything, it's going to ruin the food. And I feel like that's what multiverses have done.
Yeah.
I feel like it's been a way to avoid any actual impact on things. And I feel like it's become the lazy writer's cheat to, whoops, I did something stupid. Let me just retcon it with was multiverse and the multiverse.
Well, and I think what happened is, some of these storylines and plots got so far out of control, a writer's like, what can I do with this mess? Let me retcon it and we'll, bring it back to something, cogent again. But I think, I think they should use the multiverse sparingly. And we've said this time and again, you gotta write for kids again. If it's possible to capture that audience, that's the way to grow it. Reed and I, we're not getting any younger. And, what's going to happen when our generation's gone? My son picks up one or two comics every couple of months. No, Dad, I'm really not. It breaks your father's heart, but are you sure you don't want the new Spider-Man? I know how much, you paid $60 for the Spider-Man game. Don't you want the comic to go with it? I think, and like we've said this 2 or 3 times, but I really think the tie-ins should be more succinct and direct to where the other media, where the characters go, whether it be streaming or movie or video games. Link them all together better.
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget that younger audience. Yeah, we still like our older adult comics, but we can go to the indies for that stuff. I feel very nostalgic, and that's why I love the facsimile so much, is because I love to go back to that old material where it was pure, it was drawn, and newsprint, and the way it was drawn, the way it was written was simple, beautiful, elegant, fun for kids, fun for adults. That is the foundation of the medium itself. It's a it's meant for kids, but it's fun for adults too. And yes, if we want our intense, more adult themed comics, we can always go to the indies. But if you stay true to that original formula, that's why these characters have endured for nearly a century. Some of them is because the formula was right to begin with. You don't need to mess it up with alternate timelines and universes. You don't need to change the content of the character of your superhero to make an interesting story. If you want to write that kind of hero, you can always go to the indies and experiment there with a 6 issue mini series and see if it works. But to try it out on, like, Spider-Man or Superman, it usually falls flat, and that's why I think it's disappointing. But yeah, I mean, comics got to get the tie-in thing right, um, and make sure that it translates through all mediums. I mean, this storyline for the new Spider-Man game is really good. Jackson and his friends, they loved it so much. I mean, they dove into it for 2 weeks straight. Most of them made it through the storyline, and all I kept hearing from them was how cool the story was. And then we go to the comic shop. You want to buy the new Spider-Man? Nah,
I'm
I
good.
can do without it, Dad. Let me go shop the manga shelves.
No, I think one of the things is comic books have got, like you said, I think the tie-in piece of it's got to be better.
Yeah,
I always understood, you needed your own continuity for the comics, and I can appreciate that you want a separate continuity from the films. However, I think we've reached a point where the comic book canon that they have has been broken too much.
yeah.
Things is, and I think Spider-Man's the greatest character for this. While he's not my favorite superhero, he's top five, but he's not my favorite. But Spider-Man always felt like you were reading one consistent story. He was a high schooler, and then he was in college, and Norman Osborn's the Goblin, and then Harry's the Goblin, and the Venom era, and all. And you really felt like you were reading a journey of a person. And yeah, he probably aged 2 years for every decade, but you really felt like you were reading something.
And you can do that in comics.
Spider-Man has now been broken so many times in canon with mysterious deals to erase his marriage and
The clones, remember the clones?
clone, and even like clone stuff. They carried that okay, but even with it now, there's Spider Verses, and recently they did like he had a hidden sidekick that was erased from time, and it's I don't mind any of these things conceptually, but the problem is the comic book canon itself is such a convoluted mess of reboots and deaths and then revivals that it doesn't even make sense anymore. And
You know what? Uh, Alan Moore, recognized that early on, I think. And, and built his own universe to dabble in that, and was very successful, and arguably started the whole indie genre, even though he was working for DC.
Mhm.
um but just inspired. And I forget the editor, I forget her name now, and it's going to kill me. But she was instrumental in bringing on all this other kind of talent to tell different stories, but they didn't take Superman and tell those stories with it, you know?
No, and what's interesting is, like, Watchmen as a comic works so well because it's your introduction to Night Owl and Dr. Manhattan and Silk Spectre and all that. And so you can take these risks and these gambles, and you're not making anybody mad.
Exactly. See?
Night Owl that's kind of crazy, like Watchmen has, and there's some things in Watchmen that are a little out there. But the reason it's a classic is because it has just this foundation of these characters, and that's their appearance and who they are. If you'd have taken that gamble with, say, Batman, or and I think that book, Dr. Manhattan's pretty clear, like Captain Atom. I think he was using a lot of the Charlton characters, using
Yeah.
it. If you'd have done that with Captain Atom, or done that with Batman, or done that with the Question, said Rorschach, people would have been. However, because you took your own independent thing of the Watchmen, it works. Those risks pay off. No one's angry. You kind of have that ability to. And the thing is, it's because Alan Moore was so good at creating his own universe. I think what you have now is you have people where it's like, I want to do this story, but no one will really buy it if it's just my own. But if I throw the Spider-Man label on it, they will.
So I'm going to go work for Marvel and write that story.
And
people are going to hate it.
No, you have, what's interesting is it's almost out of habit. I will always pick up Amazing Spider-Man. I've literally had that on like a pull list as a kid at comic shop since I was 5. Recent Spider-Man, you'll literally have the writer before the thing starts go, oh, you're really gonna hate me after these next 10 issues. Like, why is that your goal in writing this book? Like, why?
So to sum it all up, like, go buy comics, go buy what you love to read.
And if you ask someone at your comic book shop, and they'll probably recommend some other characters to you and delve into those runs. Because just because your favorite character's run is not good right now, doesn't mean there's nothing good coming out.
And that's for sure.
I think you would agree, kind of to wrap it up here. I really do hope they can fix canon and continuity. I've always thought they could have their own. I think at this point, I would actually be okay with if they decided, hey, you know what? The comic book canon and the movie canon is going to match. We're going to change things to have one universal vision across the board, because I think it might actually put back some restraints that are needed.
What a genius idea.
Yeah. The thing is,
then you could buy the video game, the comic, and go see the movie.
Well, like I know they did this for the PS4 Spider-Man game, this first one that came out. They had some comic books that were tied into the video game that came out afterwards. The only comics I've ever had requested from my niece and nephew to pick up for them was those comic books. And the whole thing is to get kids back in. If you get a huge video game launch like they have, do an ongoing comic.
Yeah.
If you got something like this My Adventures with Superman cartoon that's going, that seems to have picked up a little bit of an audience, have a comic that ties into it. You've got to get people back into the medium, and expecting that they're going to delve into these 80-year histories of characters where you as the writers yourselves aren't even consistent with the canon. Why do you think some 8-year-old kid's going to want to pick that up? And so hopefully they can get back to it. I hope we see a little more positive coverage within comics. There's absolutely some things going wrong. But one thing we'll always try to do here, we want to spotlight the good things that are going on. We'll call out the bad ones when they happen. We got no problem with that. But we always want to keep this from a positive angle. And hopefully that's something you'll engage with as well.
One thing I want to put out to you, what is your favorite positive small YouTube comic channel? Name one of your favorites.
I mean, I don't know if he's small. I guess he's kind of small. I love Arlen Schumer's channel.
Oh, yeah.
He's very deep dives into the history of the characters.
I think he has a new video out this week.
Yeah, he does.
That's like a 2-hour commitment when you
watch. He does long form things, but I appreciate the work he does into it, and it's very positive, and it's cool to see spotlights on characters that are a little older that even I, as a comic book geek, don't know the complete history on.
I love Anachronic Comics.
Okay, yeah, I've seen some of
those. Sent you some of those videos. It's got like 1,000 subs, maybe 2,000 or 3,000. I'm not sure.
Giant compared to us, for sure.
A small channel, great content, and it's always, for the most part, it's pretty positive. I like the way Joey always puts a positive spin on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you can check out some things here, and as always, engage in the comments with us below. We'd love to hear, what do you think about modern comics? What are some great comics that you're reading? Is there something you would recommend? And as always, we appreciate you watching. We will see you in our next video. Thank you.
2 guys.